So we've got the amazing Kate from the Carlo Paint Hub here. Hi Kate.
Hello.
So Kate's going to be sharing her tips on tackling a painting project herself. So anybody looking to do any kind of DIY project at home, Kate is going to share her advice. So one of the first questions, Kate, that I'd love to tackle is we've loads and loads of our followers are doing DIY garden painting projects. So whether it's walls, fences. So what would your recommendation be for somebody painting walls in particular outside?
So for walls outside, you don't need an immaculate finish. You're talking speed. Number one, outside, the weather is going to be against you and you'll get fed up with the projects. I'd say speed. I don't have one in my hand now, but it's a massive pro speed brush, loads of bristles, and literally just lamping it on, especially if it's those breeze blocks we're talking about. Yeah. It's a case of getting them in. We also have a Captain Chunk roller. So it's a roller with a normal core, then a foam layer, and then your pile. And the pile is quite a long, shaggy pile. So you're getting on 30% more paint per rotation because your roller is bigger and because the foam will mold, embed itself into imperfect surfaces. So you're getting much more coverage, you're getting into the nooks and crannies. So in terms of tools for outside painting, I would go with a large exterior brush and go with the Captain Chunk roller. And then the paint, I'd go with something non-blistering, non-flaking, because there's nothing worse. If you go to cheaper product and it flakes after a year or two, you're at nothing. You're better off wait till you have the money. It might be 20 or 30% extra cost-wise, but years-wise you get that back. So usually the dearer paint products are usually about 50% cheaper than the cheaper ones, because you add up how many times you'd have to paint in a 10-year. And for sales, I would go Valti Opaque for everything.
Brilliant advice to get the job done as quickly as possible because the weather is so temperamental.
Yeah.
So no, that's fantastic. Brilliant. So another question that we get asked an awful lot are people looking to tackle internal woodwork in their house. So things like skirtings, internal doors. So Kate, what would be your tips for somebody who's going to approach a project like that?
Skirting's number one tip is go with a good water-based paint that won't yellow. Helmy 30 advert, first advert of the day, Denise. If you go oil-based, no matter what the brand, no matter what the manufacturer, it will yellow within a space of 1 to 2 years. So just there's no reason to go oil-based on your skirtings. Go water-based, get a good water-based. If your paint, if it's woodwork like your kitchen cabinets and that, if the paint is warm, it flows out a lot better. And no one really talks about that at all. If you have the paint in your garage and you take it in, like anything, like some paints are thixotropic where when agitated, they free up and they're more loose and everything. So if your paint is nice and warm, it flows out like silk. The moisture evaporates a lot easier. You get lovely flow out. You get a much superior finish with warm paint than you do with cold paint. It's not to say you need to heat up your paint, but just don't have it in a really cold environment before you paint. So a lot of good painters that have it in the footwell of their van on the way to the job, but they might have kept it inside in the hallway before they go, just not on a cold concrete floor in a garage the day before you paint. You don't need to keep it in the hot press or anything all the time, but the day before you paint, you know, give it a good stir, put the lid back on and leave it in a nice environment. On the skirting boards, filler, where the skirting board meets the wall, if there's a gap, it takes away from the scheme. So if you smoothen out that gap, there's flexi fill. It's flexible filler, so it won't crack and flake and come off. Just get your finger or a sock or anything, rub it into that crack between the wall and the skirting, and it just gives a lovely finish. And use a soft synthetic brush. We recommend the zebra ones. It's a soft synthetic bristle, and it just gives you much less brush strokes than hard, coarse bristle. Like the really hard black bristles, they track into the paint so hard, it never really levels back out. And they're not cruelty free, they're made from hog's hairs. So when you go with a soft synthetic one, they're additionally nice benefit that they're cruelty free.
Then for anybody doing an extension or a self-build who's painting brand new walls, never been painted before, what would your advice be for them, Kate?
If the wall hasn't been painted before, this is your only chance to prime the wall well. Every other coat you ever put on is resting on that one coat. So really common in Ireland is thinning down the top coat as your primer, and it just doesn't work. Especially with self-build, it's the one pitfall. You have to get a good primer. We recommend Optiva primer. It's an acrylic, it's good, it's not expensive, but none of them are expensive. The idea of your first coat of primer is Primers go back in the grind mill, they're really loose, they're really fine particle size, they should be, and what happens is they can soak in and anchor in and grip onto the surface better. If you thin out the top coat, it's just, even if you've added water, the particle size or the grind size, the fineness of the grind is the same as it was before you added the water. You've just added more water and made a looser consistency. It hasn't changed anything up. So if you water down your top coat, it just sits on the surface. So whenever you have impact or a movement crack, or you have where you've peeled off a poster, you often see where someone peels back a poster and they see the pinky plaster before. You shouldn't see that. Your primer should have soaked in, anchored in and gripped on. So really critical. If it's self-build, an extension, and it's a plasterboard wall, use a primer first, and then for years later all your other coats are resting on a sound, structurally sound base. So Optiva primer all the way.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.